Today we'll be having our webinar, and I wanted to introduce Amanda as a licensed clinical social worker and an independent professional counselor with 15 years of experience. She treats adults and families in the areas of child welfare, domestic violence, trauma, chronic health, and mental health and wellness. She's the founder and CEO of the Counseling Co-Lab in Sacramento, California. Counseling Co-Lab provides a collaborative space where therapists of all different backgrounds come together to serve the Sacramento area. Thank you, Amanda, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is the share screen working okay? Can you guys see the slides?
Yes, I'm seeing it in the PowerPoint.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you so much, Miranda and Michelle, for inviting me back to speak with all of you. Going to go a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the things that we learned in the last webinar that we did last month, which as I do these both in my private practice, this counseling sessions and webinars, it's like having to find a next level of energy because everything that we talked about last month, we're having to continue in this kind of ongoing feeling of the fatigue that's sinking in. So we will start by talking about the impact of this kind of chronic toxic stress on some of us, the second or third month of sheltering in place. So some of you may have heard of the general adaptation syndrome, GAS, which you've heard of that term of running out of gas. I feel like that's how we're all starting to feel. So in that first phase, those first few weeks, we would have been in that alarm reaction and mobilizing phase. And then when you're in phase 2 with resistance, you end up being able to, your body helps you to maintain through stressful times. And then eventually we hit exhaustion and depletion of resources, which I think many of us are feeling like we're in phase 3 right now, which is why we have to find some resiliency to at least get ourselves buffered back to phase 2 to get through the remaining months and potentially continued management of this as we go through the next year. Here's some of the actual chemicals that are getting released at the different stages and things that you might notice in your symptoms. So the DHEA is basically the adrenal gland, and it also regulates hormones. So adrenaline helps us get through and helps our body get activated to get through the stress. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but there can be adrenal fatigue when your adrenal glands have been having to work really hard during this time. And, you know, many of us in this webinar are women and might be aware of hormonal fluctuations when we're, having premenstrual syndrome. Men also have hormonal fluctuations. We just don't always talk about it. But when we're stressed, we may notice that we may notice some more intensity or more symptoms when our DHEA is elevated. Also, gastrointestinal problems, your tissues being tense or holding toxins, and sleep issues also happen in the alarm stage as well as the resistance. So when we're in the resistance phase, the cortisol, the stress hormones, stay up, DHE goes down, and then we may even get some epinephrine to help sustain energy and blood sugar levels, which is also sometimes associated with weight gain at a stressful time because our body thinks that it's having to reserve. I'm going to blame it on that, not the fact that I keep baking cookies and eating cookie dough, but it's part of the stress management. So that's definitely happening in the resistance stage. And then, when we look at this also, we're talking a little bit about our own self-regulation and leadership. Sometimes people who've been in chronic stress in their life, and this may directly apply to you or your clients, you stay in this resistance stage with elevated cortisol levels for a very long time. And others may end up having some chronic health conditions that come from this prolonged exposure to chronic stress. But when we do hit exhaustion, our body loses the ability to adapt and function. That's when we see everything just crashes out. You have severe fatigue. You may go from having sleep issues to actually insomnia. Interestingly, salt cravings kick in at that time. I think that has to do with salt being part of what can help when we're exhausted after exercising, to try to re-engage, but that you may be noticing some of these things with yourself or with your clients. Also, there's a new kind of concept going around called quarantine fatigue. This article was circulating on social media last week, and I went on the news to talk about it because I've been noticing this a lot with my clients, that they're starting to fatigue and go into that third phase of exhaustion with the stress response, and also trying to navigate maybe their own mental health needs and needs for connection while mitigating risk. And we'll go a little bit more into that, I think, in our next series, because I think we'll be further along and further reopening organizations and community places. But we need to acknowledge and name that this is a real thing we're feeling with the quarantine fatigue. So I'll let you guys read that on your own. This trauma-informed mantra actually comes from an ACEs Aware training that I attended recently, and I really liked it. And I've been kind of repeating this to myself. Mantras are really helpful to get you in the right mindset. So I'll go ahead and read this out loud, and maybe this is something you'll want to share with your teams. So we need to acknowledge that we're in the midst of an unprecedented time. We are holding a multitude of feelings, responsibilities, fears, and joys at the same time. We acknowledge that there's many responses to stress, and they're uncertain, and each one is valid. So however you're responding is valid. We acknowledge there's no better opportunity to practice compassion and collective care than right now. This is the work. So I'm going to say that again: practice compassion and collective care, and acknowledging the need for reflection, inquiry, and prioritization of our most critical needs. It's just giving us a little bit of a perspective there. So we're going to talk about self-regulation now, and I thought about it as necessary magic, because when you understand how your body operates and your nervous system operates, it kind of can feel almost magical, but it's really science, and it's about our evolution as mammals and the Homo sapiens, that we are able to have the ability to self-regulate, especially as our brains develop into adulthood. Last time we talked about self-care in a little different terms to try to give you some more resources. We talked about hyper versus hypo arousal in our activation, and the different types of self-care that are useful at those different states. So I asked you to reflect on your pre-COVID self-care plan and what maybe you needed to change, because many of our self-care activities may have been at places where we aren't able to go yet. So if you'd like to share in the chat box anything that you applied from the last session that you adapted to your self-care plan, I'd love to hear about that. And then we'll circle back to that. So quick overview of Polyvagal Theory. Again, we talked about this last time. I just want to refresh your memories. We're really interested in this theory and the skills of self-regulation and resiliency to be in the ventral vagal system, which is our ability to engage socially as humans. All of the nerves are in the face, throat, and chest. This is our ability to talk, engage, co-regulate, self-soothe, and stay calm. In the diagram to the right, you'll see the nerves are represented in green, and then the sympathetic nervous system, which is the flight or fight, where we get mobilized, runs all along our spinal cord. This is when we need that jump to get into mobilization and maybe do something to try to stay safe. We will often have an increased heart rate, tense muscles, and shallow breathing. What's interesting about trauma, though, is that you may experience this even though there isn't a threat in front of you. If you get triggered, let's say with a facial expression from your boss, and it triggers a flight or fight response within you, or even an immobilization response, your body is remembering and responding to that perceived threat, whether it's real or not. And that's where we can sometimes get into trouble, and when emotional dysregulation can happen. Dorsal vagal That's our immobilized state, the freeze, disassociate. All of those nerves are in the diaphragm, heart, and gut. And that's when we play dead, so to speak. That's what animals do to stay safe. We may feel decreased heart rate, low energy, depressed, numb, and shut down. It's just to give you a quick overview on polyvagal theory. And what we're really interested in with the dorsal vagal is finding that window of tolerance where we can stay connected and calm. This is where we want to be ideally, especially when we're working with clients or working with coworkers. We're very connected to our feelings, our sense of self. We're able to regulate, and we can go in between the states, the nervous system states, with relative ease. And if we're in this parasympathetic response, our brain and body feel safe, and that we can rest, don't have to be in fear of a threat. Our digestive system works better, and then more importantly, we're able to authentically connect with others that we might be serving or working with. So what are the signs of emotional dysregulation? Skipping down the list a little bit, essentially it's when you get emotionally flooded, when you go from 0 to 60 and all of a sudden your whatever that emotion was just came upon you so fast, like a wave. Before that happens, though, you might feel a little bit spaced out. It's hard to find your words. You feel scattered. This one's really important to notice, and you may notice it with clients as well. Tripping, dropping things, and losing things when we're emotionally dysregulated is really common. I know that's one of my signs. Some people will have a flat facial expression or vocal tone. This is sometimes I think we can get like that in our being in the work of intimate partner violence. I have what my friends and family will jokingly say, I have a social worker voice, which is very like to the point. We've got a problem solve, a little tough love in there. Then I sort of have a therapist voice, or a voice I use with my dogs or my nieces and nephews that's really calm and soft. But that kind of flat facial expression and vocal tone when you're frustrated, often with clients, will come out. So we want to be mindful of that, because the flatness can be really triggering to a trauma survivor, because trauma survivors are always trying to read people to see if they're safe or not. Some people may be the opposite of flat. They may have a really angry face or go into a rage really quickly. I once had a boss in our field who threw her cell phone, and that was really scary and jarring. She was so frustrated. Can't feel parts of your body sometimes. You get emotionally flooded. And then the adrenaline surge. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, where if you see especially like a kid that's about to fall, your whole body will jolt forward, and sometimes you'll feel like adrenaline that pulsates through your hips or your knees. My mom used to say to us, if we were climbing on something and she was afraid we were going to fall, she'd say, "You're making my knees hurt." Most people have some sense of this when you really think about it. The other day I was doing telehealth, and I was in my soft voice, calm, connected, doing a relaxation technique with a client. And I was trying to adjust my computer, and I had it kind of sitting on a low coffee table, and my computer it dropped. And I had that feeling, that surge of adrenaline in my knees, and catching the computer. I wasn't afraid of my computer breaking. I honestly felt in my body like I was dropping my client, like the way you would feel if you were going to accidentally, you're holding a puppy and they kind of wiggle and they fall, or God forbid, dropping a child or something fragile. That's how it felt in my body. It was like, oh, I have to catch her. And we had a good laugh about it, but it was a good way to model what we were talking about how these things can feel in our bodies. So we can't expect clients or coworkers to engage with us in a healthy way if we're dysregulated. And that's the most important thing about why we want to use these terms and understand what's going on in our own bodies. So what does a dysregulated nervous system look like? I'm going to show you a quick clip of what this might look like. Let's see here. And make sure your computers are muted. I think they all are.
Auto insurance is about the people inside the car and making sure they have
Sorry
everything
about
they
the
need,
ad.
like a AAA membership with roadside.
Hundreds of years of anguish, sacrifice. Yes.
It is not going well. This is what comes of telling the truth. Or is it part of it?
Amanda, is there a video attached to it? Because we can hear it but not see anything.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Let me get back to that. Okay, there we go. Can you see it now, Michelle?
Yes.
Okay.
The bread van, and I'm chasing Michael down Michigan Avenue. George, this is all your fault. I told him the truth. I said that I loved him and I kissed him, and this is what happened.
Jules, a question. When you kissed Michael, did he kiss you back?
What do you mean? We were lip to lip.
I mean, was there anything on the other side of that kiss that leads you to believe this chase will end happily?
That's beside the point. We were interrupted.
Who interrupted you?
Kimmy, she ruined everything. And Michael started chasing her before he could answer me.
Michael's chasing Kimmy.
Yes.
You're chasing Michael.
Yes.
Who's chasing you? Nobody. Get it? There's your answer, Kimmy.
No.
Yes, Jules, you are not the one. Now, for God's sake, the wedding is at 6 p.m. Small but distinct.
Okay, so you noticed the 90s cell phone there. Hope I'm not dating myself terribly on that. Okay, hold on. I've got to.
Welcome to Ms. Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 behind-the-scenes secrets from my best friend's wedding.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, let me get back over. Okay, so what did you guys notice about Julia Roberts' responses? Do you think she was in a dysregulated nervous system? We can have either in the chat box or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. Just wondering if you're noticing any of the things we talked about that might have been going on in her body. I think the biggest thing was when he asked her, what did Michael do or say when you kissed him? And she couldn't really remember what his response to the kiss was. And that's a real sign of emotional dysregulation, and took her friend to really snap her out of that and see what was going on there. But I thought that was a really good representation of dysregulation. So why do we need to be regulated? Why is that important? Well, it helps us to think. And when we're at work, working with coworkers and clients, the regulation is so important so that we can actually feel like we can communicate clearly, we can connect, and be engaged appropriately. So when we are regulated, our survival state is telling us that we're safe. Our emotional state is saying we're here with others, we're connected, that someone is with us, especially if with coworkers. Like I remember one time working at domestic violence shelter earlier in my career. We had a situation where the kids unfortunately got removed by CPS, and I was a very young new social worker. That was my first experience of that happening. Very rare thing, thankfully, in our world, but it happened that time. And I was in the broom closet crying, and I had a coworker come in and regulate with me and help me calm down. And she cried too, and we were able to breathe and give each other a hug and some comfort. But I remember having to go and literally hide in there because I was not regulated. It was very, very hard to see kids getting taken away from their mom. But that was a good example of taking space, regulating, and getting help from a coworker. So just to review from last time, there are the two types of responses, hyper-aroused and hypo-aroused. Here are some of the symptoms that might show up when you're in a flight or fight response. Hypo-aroused, freeze or avoidant. Really important to know the difference between those two. And then when we go into self-regulation, we're really talking about, how do we do this? And the first step is to notice that it's happening, notice what's happening in your body, observe in a non-judgmental way, and then adjust your technique or your behavior, your intervention. When our system is getting activated, we need to start in our bodies and really ask ourselves, what am I noticing, sensing, or feeling? Really doing a body scan. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes when I am activated, I'll feel tight in my chest. And so that's the sensation. But what does it feel like? Oh, it feels like constricting and oppressive and heavy. So when you can get those, associate the feeling words with the sensation, it gives it more of a imprinted memory, so that like, oh yeah, my chest is tightening, I might be having some activation going on. And then in others, we always look at body language, but you can also look at your own and start to pay attention to your own body language. You may sit back in your chair, cross your arms, cross your legs. Staying grounded is so important. I know I'm always wanting to cross my legs, but I've learned that keeping my feet flat on the ground really helps with grounding and staying present with clients. And noticing breathing changes as well is a really good indication that you're getting activated. And then here's the observing part. So really, if you can just start to do one of these things, the other parts will line up. And just being able to pause and not get emotionally flooded or reactive is really what the goal of what we're talking about. So if you can pause and ask yourself, what is the cause of this emotional dysregulation or this flooding? What elements are here in the situation I'm in? What's going on with me? Did I have a nightmare last night? Did I get in a fight with my husband on the way to work? And then what are your body and your emotions telling you? Have one of your values not been met? This gets into kind of the things that we deal with a lot in our field with moral injury. If we see something really unjust happening, or maybe someone crosses a boundary that we set, and then asking yourself, this is my favorite one, what's the story you're telling yourself about the situation? So let's say that your boss is one of those chronically stressed, high cortisol people who's always in an intense mode with a flat facial expression and tone of voice. You might be telling yourself a story that she's displeased with you, or you did something wrong, she doesn't like you. You may be making up a whole story about that. So that would be a good opportunity to be able to explore more and ask and get clarification for your assumption that you're making. When we have trauma-informed organizations, we're able to have this kind of conversation. I feel very attuned to my team of therapists here. I usually try to tell them if I'm having a rough time as a supervisor, so that they kind of know maybe I'm not going to be as engaged or connected to them because I might be dealing with my own stress. And then they're empowered to say to me, like, hey, are you doing okay today? What's going on? Something seems off. And it's my choice if I tell them or not, but it's a clue that maybe we need to do some co-regulating. Maybe we need to do some breathing. Maybe we need to go for a walk, take a break before we try to have a tough conversation, especially. So if you can start to use this language with one another, it becomes a much more accepting, validating environment for ourselves and our organizations. And then knowing that you're empowered to make adjustments. Ask yourself, what do I need right now in this moment? Do I need sleep? Do I need exercise? Do I need to eat? Do I just need to be empathetic with myself? We're so focused on others. You guys are all serving your organizations, multitasking, homeschooling kids and working from home. Be empathetic with yourself. This is hard. This is difficult. No one's ever been through any of this before. So when maybe you have your window of tolerance short and you're kind of going between shutting down and like full on snapping at your kids or your coworkers, to just go, okay, my window of tolerance feels really short and I'm having some dysregulation. I'm going to be empathetic and do something about that. And then what do you do? A mindfulness technique. We went over some last time. We'll go over some more today, but there's just so many things that we can quickly do to get regulated. So the first thing, if you're dysregulated, is to seek safety. Do not drive, do not operate machinery. Do not make big decisions. Don't try to finish a conversation. You can kind of fill in the blank there. This is the time to pause, breathe, and do some sort of a grounding technique. Communication wise, you might say something like, I want to continue this conversation, but let's wait till we're both calm. That one would be so helpful in interpersonal relationships. That's the harder one to do, but at work, maybe you could try it out. You can always excuse yourself. You don't have to tell anybody. Some people may not even notice that you're dysregulated. A lot of us are really good at hiding it. But you might notice it's happening. So you say, can I go to the bathroom, or I need to step outside? Just give me a minute. If you're on the phone and you're having a difficult conversation, get off the phone and try again when you're calmer. Tell the person you've got to call on the other line. So grounding techniques, these are really quick, easy things that take less than a minute. So a lot of us are on Zoom calls all the time. We're maybe seeing clients over a video conference or telehealth. One thing I recently heard was to try to have some texture under your desk and take your shoes off. When we're in the computer world and there is this real easy, because we're not in front of someone, to get checked out or dysregulated. So if you can put like a fuzzy blanket or rug, a tennis ball, one of those little soft spiky stress balls, and just roll your feet on that. Most of us, are chilling in our pajama bottoms and our slippers anyway. So why not use your feet to your advantage to ground? Another thing you can do is to trace the room with your eyes or your fingers on a wall. Tracing your eyes around the room is something that you can do that's not very noticeable. If you were to get up and trace your finger on the wall, that would be a little more noticeable, but that really helps you feel the safety and the containment of wherever you're at that is safe. Another thing you can do is just stamp your feet back and forth and say right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. You could just shift your weight if you're standing talking to someone, back and forth on your feet, and just inside of your head say right foot, left foot. Pressing your tongue on the back of your teeth, again, something no one would notice. This is just giving you that connection of staying present, calming down, and then noticing 5 things. So you can just look around if you're really starting to feel like you're checking out or getting dysregulated. Just looking around wherever you are. Maybe you can do it with me, just in your head. Think of one thing you can see, one thing you can touch, one thing you can taste, something you can smell. That's usually a hard one for people, but if you've got any perfume, you can smell your lotion, your perfume, something you can hear. And then eating something rich in protein. So some of you may have heard of that term, hangry. I'm a victim of that as well. So you're going into a difficult conversation or a potentially emotionally dysregulating situation, even just going to work. Some of us might have some of our routines thrown off working from home, but making sure that you're eating something that's protein-based before work. And then in the middle of the day, if you need to just grab a quick snack. I had a coworker when I worked in a domestic violence shelter who would just eat a tablespoonful of peanut butter when she was running around and she couldn't maybe sit down to actually eat a snack, and that would help sustain her. And then washing hands, we're already doing that a lot. You can do that mindfully by noticing how the water feels, how the soap smells, and how squishy it feels. So while you're washing your hands, be in the moment, be mindful. And then the pressure, we talked last time about weighted blankets and different techniques to help you regulate and deal with anxiety. You may not be able to do that in a moment of a tough conversation or while you're doing telework. If you pressure back into your chair, and maybe again, you can try some of these things with me, push a part of your body into the corner of your chair or the corner of a wall, just standing up, putting some pressure on your back. And then pressure around your torso, which is why hugs are so important, which a lot of us aren't getting those right now. If you do have someone that you're sheltering in place with, see if they're open to hugging, because it really does help right now, and it helps calm our nervous system. But one thing you can do, I call it the coach's pose. That comes from Stephen Porges and the Polyvagal Theory people. But you take your right hand and you put it under your left armpit, and then you take your left hand and you put it over your right shoulder. So again, if you guys want to try these techniques with me, I call it the coach's pose because I can remember seeing a coach stand like this, kind of leaning back, but you kind of would do that. It's a little harder to do as women, but the point is that you're really containing yourself and feeling this pressure on your arms as if someone was hugging you. The reason that your right hand's under your left armpit is for that heart rate regulation. So you could just stand like this, do this for a few breath cycles, and really be grounded after that. So voice tone, I'm gonna flip over to show you a good example of a very appropriate tone of voice that I think most of us know about Mr. Rogers. So let me get set up to show you that.
What kinds of things do you do when you're waiting? I sometimes just sit and breathe in, breathe out. In, out. And I just think in, out.
So simple, right? Just there's actually quite a few YouTube videos for Mr. Rogers for adults. I got a little lost in those as I was preparing the presentation. I don't, probably is a little bit of a generational thing, but the sound of Mr. Rogers' voice and how connected that he is with people. There's just so many good video clips of him with children as well as adults. And he really mastered this voice tone, which is going to help you stay calm as well as a client or someone who's distressed. There was a story of a World War I veteran who was helping a person who had been shot and needed to stay calm to get medical attention. And they happened to be French, and they knew a little bit of French, and they were trying to use techniques from some hypnosis they had learned. And he was saying in French, keep your eyes open in a really calm voice. And he ended up finding out that later that he said, keep your ears open. But it didn't really matter what he was saying because he used that really calm tone of voice. And, we can see this a lot with animals too. Those of you that have dogs and cats, you might think that they know what you're saying, but they're very attuned to the micro expressions in your face and your tone of voice. They may know the word walk or treat like my dogs do, but so I will be shocked sometimes that they seem to be able to predict what I'm going to do next, because they're picking up on all these subtleties, my voice, my body. And this is what, traumatized people are very, very attuned to voice. A lot of men tend to have that low baritone voice when they're talking to children or disciplining them. And then they'll have like a sweet voice that maybe they do with like a baby or an animal. But that low frequency tone immediately triggers the sympathetic response, and that we're in danger. And we can have a version of that. Sometimes women will get higher pitched when they're distressed, but if we can stay even and calm, we are going to stay calm, and so will our clients and coworkers. So movement with breath and sound is really important also. So, with trauma, a lot of times, especially when we feel like our nervous system might have betrayed us, if we ever freeze or get immobilized, we know this a lot with our sexual assault survivors. They'll feel very confused about their body's response and some shame around that. And it's all, we know from Polyvagal Theory, it makes perfect sense, because if you're immobilized, then you're staying safe in a moment of being assaulted, for example. And so when we learn to know what's going on in our nervous system, we can be far less judgmental and more free after the post-traumatic growth that's available to us. And when we're immobilized, we often will feel like, our bodies betrayed us, they didn't do what we needed, but also the voice, our own voice, gets stifled. And so when you're doing trauma work, being able to help people breathe and make sounds at the same time is also helpful. So if you were feeling like you were having a rough day, you could try one of these breath with movement and sounds. So this comes from the mudra from yoga. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate, and again, you can do this with me. So we're going to say these words as we're just making a sound with the breath and moving our palms at the same time. And we just want to keep our hand relaxed and calm. And I'll just show you how to do it real quickly. Hum, sa, so, hum, so, hum, hum, sa, so, hum, hum, sa, hum, sa, so, hum. So again, breath, sound, and movement, all very healing and helpful for our regulation system. So another exercise I'd like to lead you through real quickly. We'll do this one, and then we'll still have a few minutes for questions and answers. So go ahead and place your hand on your heart and begin to layer through the body. Feel your skin, the fascia, connect with the bones and into your heart organ. And try to feel your heart beating. Just allow yourself to be still for a moment and feel your own heart's vibration of love for yourself and others. If your mind is busy, put the thoughts on an imaginary shelf and just focus on your breath. And as you're breathing, bring into your mind's eye an image and a thought of anything that evokes joy for you. Allow that joy to fill your being. Focus on the immediate feeling of joy as your heart leaps through and brings this beloved image to mind. It can be an image of nature, a friend, maybe it's Mr. Rogers, music, art, family, anything that brings joy to you. It is an actual moment of remembrance of the joy we're focusing on. This allows us to connect with the universal conscious of joy. Go ahead and breathe in for 4 counts. And hold for 2. And exhale, pushing the breath out like you're breathing through a straw for 6. And go ahead and inhale for 4. Hold for 2. And exhale for 6. Inhale for 4. Hold for 2. And exhale for 6. Okay, as we come back just to finish the last slide and then answer any questions you all might have. Now that you know more about your nervous system and trusting in this necessary magic, or the science, I guess, of our bodies, just remember many responses are involuntary. And whatever your body is doing, it's trying to seek safety. And find some gratitude for your responses when they happen. And be curious when your response is different than what you expected, and don't judge yourself. Be really empathetic. And sometimes in this work, we have this part of ourselves that's that inner advocate or helper that doesn't always turn off, maybe even in our interpersonal relationships and at home. We may overfunction in our house. We may do more for our kids and our partners or our coworkers. And sometimes the advocate needs to rest and take a break and not be on all the time. And doing this, you'll find that self-regulation and ability to be connected to coworkers and clients. And be really happy when your nervous system does kick into gear. There's no bad or good way of responding. And trust me, when you need to fight or flight, you want to be able to get into that window. Recently, I was on a walk and there was a coyote. And we were more concerned about the threat of a crowded hiking path. And we were talking about maybe if it's crowded, we'll leave. That was where my focus was. And then I saw a coyote. And within seconds, I was able to say, there's a coyote. My husband hesitated because he went into, how do I fight the coyote? Thankfully, he listened to me this time. We scooped the dogs up and walked quickly back to the car. But it took about 15 minutes to calm back down because of this awareness I now have about self-regulation. I was very activated. I was very afraid. I was hyperventilating. And I waited till I was back in my window of tolerance, till I drove again. But I felt so much gratitude that I saw the coyote and that I was able to go in to flee, to get away from the danger. If I would have waited another second, I might have frozen. I might have started hyperventilating right then and there on the path, and I would have been in more danger. So as you do these practices more and more and model them for our clients, then we're all really focused on seeking safety in all interactions and relationships. So thank you guys, and we'll have some Q&A now.
Hi, Amanda. I have a question in regards to the inner advocate. I think that's such a great description for many of us who, feel like there's not an off switch per se. So, and I know for me, one of the things that I've really worked on and I have not had success with is being able to not define myself by how much I do. So for those who are similar, are there any tips or tricks to allow us to have kind of that grace with ourselves, to not feel like, especially now with the pandemic and all that's required for many people, especially direct service providers, to not feel like we have to be on all the time and doing, and if we're not pulling our weight or doing our part.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. That's, I think, something probably everybody in this virtual room knows what that's like. So tips and tricks for that. in certain types of therapy, we have something called parts work, where in archetypes, where you really name and acknowledge the different parts of yourself. And some of us are really, really defined by our work, and we're advocating and helping and saving all the time in all areas of our lives. So we need to find another part of ourselves. And sometimes it helps to go back to thinking about what gave us joy when we were children and find some play, because when we're playing, and it can be hard to play if you didn't learn to play as a child, or it wasn't safe to play, or you couldn't play, but you can learn to play as an adult. And when you're able to play in that playful spirit of, okay, maybe when I was really little, I used to love to just sit in the far corner of the schoolyard and make daisy chains. I literally used to do that. There was something about being outside in the grass, using my hands, kind of crafting, creating something. So for me, I go into my creative side that is not about advocating or helping. Sometimes my advocate will show up when I'm trying to do a project and it's not going perfectly well. But I acknowledge her and I say, thank you. I don't need you right now. You're off. Today's your off day. Today, you can find names for your playful self. My name's Amanda, but I go by Mandy. So Mandy likes to play. Mandy likes to do creative things with clothes and fashion and cook and be outside and play with my dogs. That's when my advocate self, my therapist self is resting and on a break. And I have to literally, as weird as it sounds, kind of talk to her and tell her, thank you for showing up and trying to get involved here, but I don't need you. I am just chilling right now. And I need that so that I can, so you look at that stress response, when we go into that fatigue and burnout, if you go into full like adrenal fatigue and shut down and you get sick from the stress, there's no bouncing out of that ends up being, having to take a leave of absence and that kind of thing. So we need to be resilient and stay in this. And it's such an opportunity when we're self-isolating and sheltering in place to get back in touch with that playful side of ourselves, or discover something new that we want to explore in our creative, playful side of ourselves.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or comments, feedback?
And people, you're welcome to either enter any questions in the chat, and you also have the ability to unmute yourself and ask the question as well.
How do you introduce the idea of going through a grounding exercise with a client who is dysregulated?
Great question. Because sometimes the worst thing that you can do with someone who's dysregulated is say, calm down. I need you to calm down right now. That's that social worker part that comes through. So really the introduction of the grounding exercise is you modeling what you're wanting for the client. So saying something like, I'm noticing that maybe you're feeling a little tense right now, or you're moving your leg. Like a lot of people kick their foot. You just kind of say something that you're seeing, see how that lands with them. Really making sure that you're sitting at the same eye level. Start into your calm tone and make sure that you have your feet on the ground, you're grounded, and you start breathing in the way that we've demonstrated, the deep diaphragmatic breath. A lot of times people will just mirror that without you having to say or do anything to say, like we're going to do a grounding exercise. So modeling and mirroring is the number one thing. And then another thing with trauma survivors also is really important to give choice. If we are forcing people to do something or demanding that they do it, that can be re-traumatizing. So you could say something like, I'm noticing that you're starting to move around a lot, or your voice is getting shaky or loud. I'd like to offer you a deep breath. Does that sound like something your body would want to do? No, I don't want to do that. And we'll do a role play in our next webinar. You guys can give me a run for my money. But they say no. Okay, well, would your body like to move? Check in with your body. Does your body want to move? Yeah, I just want to get out of here. I just want to get out of this room. This is just too much. I don't know what you're telling me about all these crazy rules. Okay, go ahead. You can move. You can get up. You can move around. You can walk around. We can go for a walk. You can step out, come back. Just choice after choice. And that word of, can I offer you a deep breath? Would you like to try this breathing technique with me? It looks like you're getting, I have a client who always checks out and kind of looks off, and I'll just say, what was coming up for you just then? Oh, I was thinking about this or that. Okay, how about we look at each other and we just take a deep breath. How would that sound? And most of the time, people will either do it because you're doing it, or they'll feel more seen and heard when you give them choice.
Amanda, I have a quick question in regards to, I know you mentioned last time as well, meditation. Is there any science behind why some people are able to meditate and why others, when they start to meditate, they fall asleep, outside of maybe they're sleepy? But is there any science behind that, why some people aren't able to keep that going and will fall asleep?
Yeah, I mean, really, if you fall asleep when you're meditating, you're probably someone who's actually really quickly getting into their parasympathetic nervous system, because your body's being told, I feel safe to rest and digest. So falling asleep is a sign that you actually are feeling quite safe, and you're going into parasympathetic. The meditation where you're trying to keep a mental focus or use a mantra and not actually fall asleep, that can come with practice. And there are a lot of benefits to being able to have a calm body while being alert and focusing on a mantra or whatever guided visualization you're doing, because then you're really in that dorsal vagal part where you're still engaged because you're still awake and with it. But, I think a lot of, I've studied a lot of meditation, and even that some of the most practiced masters will just say, sometimes you fall asleep and it's okay, and you just let yourself fall asleep. Sometimes in yoga, there'll be someone who in Shavasana starts snoring, and it's like, oh, wow, they got really relaxed. So that's a good sign that you're really calm. But if you want to be alert and have a thinking clear mind, awake with a calm body, then you're really in that window of tolerance of the dorsal ventral part of your nervous system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. and I know we're out of time. Someone sent a private message asking about clients who aren't used to having choices. And so how do you not overwhelm them if you give them too many choices? This was with trafficking victims. So I would say just real quickly that's really important to know. Maybe you just give them two choices, like, okay, we can do this breath work, or we can get up and walk, and just give them two choices, and not, sometimes when you ask people, how's your body feeling? They're like, what are you talking about? Because they've never been connected to their body. So you just have to take it really slow and easy, and give choice, but not too many, so you don't overwhelm them. That was a great question, though.
Oh. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Michelle.
No, go ahead.
Just going to say thank you so much for presenting and agreeing to come back, and hope that this was helpful for everyone and definitely learned some new techniques. So we will be able to make the recording of this available for folks afterwards if you're interested. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you guys next month for our third one, and I think it's June 8th.
Yes.
Okay.
I believe so.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.